Welcome back, guys. So in the previous video we looked at how to use RSAT to allow the user to perform the delegated control, the task that you have granted over to the person. Now, based on the organizational policy, you may delegate different tasks to different people. You can use RSAT to make sure that they can perform the tasks. The other way that you can actually do this is you can use the remote desktop connection. So in this case, the user logs onto the server through remote desktop services. But one thing you have to know is that in the domain environment, the only people who have the right to log onto the server through remote desktop service is the administrator and members of the administrators group. Now, we are going to try out a couple of things so that in case in the real environment you actually face some of these problems, you know how to bypass it. So I'm going to click remote desktop connections here, and I need to specify, I'm going to put in my server's IP address, and then I'll click connect. So if everything is alright, it should ask me for credentials, so I need to provide my password. And then I'll say okay. So at this point it looks like everything is okay. So it's going to try to establish a remote desktop connection to my server, but it's not going to work because this is just a standard user account, and standard user accounts are not permitted to log on to the server through remote desktop services. So I'm going to walk you through a few things that you have to do to make sure that a standard user account can log onto the server as a remote desktop user. Most of the time, some administrators what they do is they rather add the user that they want to log onto the server through remote desktop to the administrators group, and in that case making that user an administrator. That is very wrong for you to do, because in that case then you're going to breach what we call separation of duty. In every environment there's supposed to be separation of duty, and also you breach the least privilege. The person must have the minimum privilege necessary that they require to work. So if you add the person to the administrator's account, then that is not going to work. So the connection was denied because the user account is not authorized for remote login. Alright, so there are a few things that we can do. Now let's go back to the server and then let me walk you through some few stuff. Okay, let's go to Active Directory. Now I want us to look at the built-in container. Now when you look at the built-in container, there is one option here, remote desktop users. It says members in this group are granted the right to log on remotely. They are granted the right to log on remotely. So then we need to add that user to this group. So let's go ahead, open this, double click on it, and then go to members and then add. So I'm going to add my user who is wdyke, check names, okay, and then apply. Okay, wdyke has been added there. So let me go back and then reinitiate the connection again. Okay, so let's see how best this goes this time around. Alright, so we are waiting. Now this also is not going to work. Even though it's going to bring you a screen, you still can't sign in. So this is where I don't get it, because according to the description for the group, the users that are logged in, that are added to the group remote desktop group, are supposed to be able to log on through remote desktop services. But then it says to sign in remotely, you need the right to sign in through remote desktop services. By default, members of the administrators group have this right. If the group you are in doesn't have this right, or if the group, so we just couldn't log in. Are we okay? So then there is one more thing that we have to successfully do. If you really want to make a standard user to be able to log onto a server through remote desktop services, then it goes beyond just adding the person to the remote desktop group. You also have to alter the default domain policy. You have to alter the default domain policy. So we are not going to talk about group policies for now, but then I'm just going to walk you through what you need to do to make sure that the user or the standard user can log on to the server through remote desktop services. So I click Tools, then I come to Group Policy Management. For now, I'm going to be blind on all of these. So just expand the forest, expand domains, then expand the domain. Now, we have underneath the domain, we have what we call default domain policy. You see it? All right. So what we have to do now is I'm going to right click on this and then I'll go to edit. This is going to bring up the group policy management editor. Now under computer configuration, I'm going to expand policies. Then I'll expand Windows settings. Then I will expand security settings. Then I'm going to expand local policies. Then I'll click on the user rights assignment. So here we want to make sure the person can log on through remote desktop services. So allow log on through remote desktop services. So I right click on this, go to properties, then define the policies. So I check it, then add user or group. Don't type the username, browse. Then you can type remote, check names, and then add the remote desktop users. Then okay, okay again, you apply and then okay. So what this is going to do is it is going to grant that group called remote desktop users the right to log on through remote desktop services, and then because the user is a member of that group, the user will also have the right to log on to the server through remote desktop services. By doing this, you grant the user the right to log on through remote desktop services. So now I can close this, and then the policy is already linked, but then I have to do one thing. All I have to do is go to the command prompt and then do a group policy update using the command gp update, and then I'm going to add the force to it. So this is going to update the policies, and then I will try initiating the remote desktop again, and this time it should work. So it is done. So let's go back to the client system. So connect again, and then okay. So it's going to take a little time, but then this time it will work. Okay, so I say yes to the certificate, and here we are. So now I've been able to log onto the server through remote desktop services. I've been able to log onto the server through remote desktop service. But then here also, this is not the end. Here also, this is not the end, because now the person is directly on the server. When you try opening Server Manager, it's going to ask for credentials. So I'm going to enter my username wdyke and then my password. It's still going to bring it up. Now this is the reason why we've been granted access to log onto the server, but then we do not have the right to access the Server Manager, even though we were granted a delegation of control using the delegation of control wizard. If the person is logging onto the server through remote desktop services, and then the person is going to perform user account management or any other thing, then you have to add the person to the built-in group called account operators. account operators. So in this case also, we did not add the person to the administrators group, but then we are adding the person to the account operators group. So back to Active Directory, built-in account operators, this one. Then members, so I'm going to just add the user wdike, check names, okay, apply. Okay, so in this case, when the user try accessing the server manager again, and then the person types their credentials and then their password, it should work. So now server manager is coming up. So these are some of the things that you can do to make sure that a standard user account is able to log onto the server through remote desktop services. So first you have to add the person to the built-in remote desktop users group. Then you also have to alter the default domain policy, and then make sure that the built-in remote desktop group has the capability to log on through remote desktop services. Then after that, you also need to add the user to the account operators group if the person is going to log onto the server through remote desktop services, or any other group that will allow him to access the server manager, like the backup operators or any of those other groups. So basically, this is how you grant a normal or a standard user account the right to log onto the server through remote desktop services without necessarily making the user an administrator. Thank you for watching.